A cafe in Lyon, France, 1942. A woman with an elegant coat and a slight limp walks in. She orders coffee, sits down, and opens a newspaper. To anyone watching, she's just another civilian trying to survive the occupation. But hidden in that newspaper is a coded message, names, locations, drop zones for weapons. This woman coordinates an entire network of resistance fighters right under the noses of the Gestapo. Her name is Virginia Hall. She's an American from Baltimore, and she has a wooden leg. The Nazis have labeled her one of the most dangerous Allied agents in France. They've put her face on wanted posters all over the country. They call her the Limping Lady, and they've ordered every agent in France to find her and kill her. But they never will. By the end of the war, Virginia will have organized sabotage operations, coordinated resistance networks, rescued Allied airmen, and armed French fighters who will help liberate their own country. She'll do it all with a prosthetic leg she named Cuthbert, and when it's over, she'll become the only civilian woman in World War II to receive the Distinguished Service Cross. This is the story of a woman who lost her leg but never lost her nerve. A woman who spoke 5 languages and could disappear into a crowd even though she walked with a limp. A woman who turned her disability into her disguise and her determination into a weapon the Nazis couldn't defeat. Virginia Hall was born on April 6, 1906, in Baltimore, Maryland. She came from a well-to-do family, the kind that had money but also had values. Her father, Edwin Lee Hall, ran a successful movie theater business. He was a businessman, practical and hard-working. Her mother, Barbara Virginia, was sophisticated and cultured. She believed in education, in experience, in living life fully. Virginia grew up in a big house with everything she needed: good schools, piano lessons, nice clothes, summer vacations. She went to the best private schools in Baltimore. She had opportunities that most girls in 1906 could only dream about. But here's the thing about Virginia. She didn't want comfort. She didn't want safe. She wanted adventure. From the time she was a little girl, Virginia was different. While other girls played with dolls and dreamed about marriage and children, Virginia dreamed about far-off places. She wanted to see mountains and oceans and cities she'd only read about in books. She wanted to speak different languages, eat different food, meet different people. She wanted the world, and she wasn't going to let anyone tell her she couldn't have it. Virginia attended Roland Park Country School in Baltimore, one of the finest girls' schools in the country. She was a good student, but not just book smart. She had something else: determination. When Virginia decided she wanted something, she didn't give up until she got it. After high school, she went to Radcliffe College in Massachusetts, one of the 7 sisters colleges associated with Harvard, then Barnard College in New York, another prestigious women's college. She studied languages, literature, history, economics, but the classroom wasn't enough for her. In the 1920s, when most American women stayed close to home, Virginia packed her bags and sailed to Europe. She studied at the Sorbonne in Paris. She studied in Vienna, Austria. She studied in Germany. Everywhere she went, she learned the language. Not just learned it, mastered it. French, German, Italian, Russian, Spanish. She collected languages like other people collected stamps. And she didn't just speak them. She spoke them with the right accent, the right idioms, the right cultural nuances. By her mid-20s, Virginia spoke 5 languages fluently. She could pass for a native speaker in French or German. That skill, that gift for languages, would save her life more than once in the years to come. She had one dream, one clear goal that drove everything she did. She wanted to work for the United States, Foreign Service. She wanted to be a diplomat, to represent her country abroad, to be part of something bigger than herself, to sit across negotiating tables and shape the future of nations, to be there when history was being made. It was an audacious dream for a woman in the 1920s and 30s. The Foreign Service was a boys' club, an old boys' club at that. Women weren't supposed to aspire to that kind of power, that kind of influence. They were supposed to get married, have children, maybe teach school or work as a secretary until they found a husband. But Virginia didn't care what she was supposed to do. She knew what she wanted, and she was going after it. In 1931, she got her first opportunity. She was hired as a consular clerk at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, Poland. It wasn't the diplomatic position she ultimately wanted, but it was a start. It was a foot in the door. She worked hard, proved herself competent and reliable. She handled paperwork, assisted diplomats, learned how embassies functioned from the inside. She watched and learned and waited for her chance to move up. Her work in Warsaw impressed her superiors. When an opening came up in Izmir, Turkey, she got the transfer. Izmir was on the coast, a beautiful city with a mix of cultures, European and Middle Eastern. Virginia loved it. She did her job at the consulate during the day, but in her free time she explored. She learned Turkish phrases. She went to markets and bazaars. She tried the local food. She made friends with locals and other expatriates, and on her days off, she went hunting. Virginia was an excellent shot. She'd learned to hunt as a girl back in Maryland. She loved being outdoors, loved the challenge of tracking game, loved the focus required to make a clean shot. In Turkey, she hunted birds in the marshlands near the coast. It was on one of these hunting trips that everything changed. That's where everything changed. December 1933. Virginia was on a hunting trip in the marshlands, near Izmir. She was 27 years old, enjoying a rare day off from the consulate. The weather was cold but clear. Perfect hunting weather. She had her shotgun, her gear, and she was focused on the hunt. She was climbing over a wire fence, the kind farmers put up to mark property lines. Her shotgun was in her hand. She'd done this 100 times before, but this time something went wrong. Maybe her hand slipped. Maybe the gun caught on the fence. Maybe it was just a moment of bad luck, the kind of split-second accident that changes everything. The gun discharged. The blast was deafening. Virginia looked down and saw blood. So much blood. Her left foot was mangled, barely attached. The pain hit her like a lightning bolt, white-hot and all-consuming. She screamed. The people she was hunting with heard the shot, heard her scream, and came running. They found her on the ground, blood soaking into the earth, her face white with shock and pain. They got her to a hospital as fast as they could, but it was 1933 in rural Turkey. Medical care was basic at best. The doctors at the local hospital did what they could, but the wound was catastrophic. The shotgun blast had destroyed bones, severed arteries, pulverized tissue. They stabilized her and transferred her to a better-equipped hospital in Istanbul. But by then, infection had set in. Gangrene. The doctors explained it to Virginia in clear terms. If they didn't amputate, the infection would spread. She would die. It was that simple. The leg or her life. Virginia was 27 years old, lying in a hospital bed in Istanbul, being told they were going to cut off her leg. She could have fallen apart, could have given in to despair. Instead, she made the hardest decision of her life. Cut it off. Do what you have to do. Save my life. They amputated her left leg below the knee. When she woke up from the surgery, groggy from anesthesia, she reached down to touch her leg. Her hand found empty space where her calf and foot should have been. The reality of it hit her all at once. Her leg was gone. And with it, she thought, her dreams. Virginia spent weeks in that hospital, recovering from the surgery, learning to deal with phantom pains where her foot used to be. The doctors fitted her with a wooden prosthetic leg. It was uncomfortable, awkward, heavy, Walking required conscious effort. Every step was a reminder of what she'd lost. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Virginia applied to join the Foreign Service as a diplomat. She had everything they should want. She was educated at the best schools. She spoke 5 languages fluently. She had years of experience working in embassies. She knew how diplomacy worked. She was perfect for the job. The U.S. Foreign Service rejected her application. The reason? Her prosthetic leg. They had a policy, clear and non-negotiable. No one with an artificial limb could serve as a diplomat. It didn't matter that Virginia could walk, could work, could do everything the job required. The rule was the rule. They weren't going to make an exception, not even for someone as qualified as Virginia Hall. Think about what that must have felt like. She'd worked for years toward this goal. She'd done everything right. She'd educated herself, trained herself, proven herself, and they rejected her because of an accident, because of a moment of bad luck that cost her a leg. It would have been so easy to give up right there, to go home to Baltimore, to live off her family's money, to accept that her dreams were over. Nobody would have blamed her. She'd lost her leg. She'd been rejected from her dream career. She had every reason to quit. But Virginia Hall wasn't a quitter. A lot of people would have gone home, would have accepted defeat, would have let that be the end of the story, would have spent the rest of their lives bitter and angry about the unfairness of it all. But Virginia Hall wasn't a lot of people. She had something inside her, something unbreakable. A refusal to accept limitations, a determination that bordered on stubbornness. She got fitted with a wooden prosthetic leg. It was crude by today's standards, just a wooden peg with a leather socket that fit over her stump. Walking on it hurt, especially at first. The leather rubbed her skin raw. The wood didn't flex like a real foot. Every step was a conscious effort, a reminder of what she'd lost. But Virginia practiced. She walked every day, building up her strength and endurance. She learned to minimize her limp, to walk almost normally when she needed to. She learned which surfaces were easier, which stairs were trickier, which movements caused pain. She adapted, and she named her prosthetic leg Cuthbert. Nobody knows exactly why she chose that name. Maybe it was British, sophisticated, the kind of name that made the leg seem less like a disability and more like a companion. Whatever the reason, Cuthbert became part of her identity. Her wooden leg wasn't her weakness. It was just part of who she was. And she went back to work. If they wouldn't let her be a diplomat, fine. She'd find another way to serve, another way to matter. She took a position as a consular clerk in Venice, Italy, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, then Estonia on the Baltic Sea. She kept working, kept learning, kept pushing forward through bureaucracy and paperwork and the daily grind of consular work. She wasn't going to let a piece of wood define her. She wasn't going to let an accident destroy her dreams. She was going to keep going, keep fighting, keep proving that she was more than her disability. But the world was changing in ways nobody could have predicted. The 1930s brought economic depression, political upheaval, and the rise of fascism across Europe. Virginia watched it happen from her various postings. She saw Mussolini consolidate power in Italy. She saw Hitler rise to power in Germany. She saw the warning signs that most people ignored or dismissed. And then, in September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. Europe erupted into the deadliest conflict in human history. Virginia was in Paris when France declared war on Germany. She could have left. Should have left, really. She was an American citizen. America wasn't in the war yet. She could have booked passage on a ship back to Baltimore, gone home where it was safe, sat out the war in comfort. Her family certainly wanted her to come home. They sent letters begging her to leave Europe before it was too late, but Virginia couldn't do it. She'd seen too much. She'd watched the Nazis expand across Europe, crushing freedom wherever they went. She'd talked to Jewish refugees fleeing Germany, heard their stories of persecution and terror. She'd seen the newsreels of Nazi rallies, the marching soldiers, the swastikas, the hate. She knew what was coming, and she knew she had to do something. So instead of going home, Virginia enlisted in the French Ambulance Corps as a private, not as an officer or an administrator, as a driver. She would be on the front lines, driving wounded soldiers from aid stations to hospitals. It was dangerous, exhausting work. The ambulances had no armor, no protection. They drove through combat zones, through artillery fire, through chaos. Virginia drove through all of it. She loaded wounded men into her ambulance, men with missing limbs, men with sucking chest wounds, men screaming in pain or silent with shock. She drove them from the Haute-Loire region to the larger military hospitals in Paris, racing against time, trying to save as many as she could. She saw the blood, the screaming, the dying, the horrible reality of war that most people never see. She saw young men, boys really, torn apart by bullets and shrapnel. She saw what the Nazis were doing to Europe, the destruction they were causing, the lives they were ending. And she decided she couldn't just watch anymore. She had to fight. June 1940. France fell to the Germans in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. One of the most powerful military nations in Europe, defeated in a month and a half. The Nazis marched into Paris. The swastika flew over the Eiffel Tower. French soldiers laid down their arms. The government surrendered. France was divided into 2 zones. The northern zone, including Paris, was occupied by German forces. The southern zone was supposedly independent, governed by the Vichy regime, but everyone knew Vichy was just a puppet government doing whatever the Nazis told them to do. Virginia watched it happen with growing horror and rage. This wasn't just military defeat. This was the death of freedom, the triumph of tyranny, the victory of evil over good. She made a decision right there. She wasn't going to accept this. She wasn't going to stand by while Europe burned. She made her way to London, a journey that was dangerous and complicated. She had to travel through Spain, across the Pyrenees mountains, navigating checkpoints and border guards and the constant risk of being stopped and questioned. But she made it. When she arrived in London, she went straight to the U.S. Embassy. They recognized her from her earlier work in the diplomatic service. They offered her a job, a safe desk job as a code clerk in the U.S. Defense Attaché office. It would have been easy, safe, comfortable, a way to sit out the war behind a desk in London while other people did the fighting. Virginia turned it down flat. She didn't come to London to file paperwork. She came to fight. But how? What could one woman with a wooden leg do against the Nazi war machine? That's when fate intervened in the form of George Bellows. Bellows was a British agent, one of the many intelligence officers Britain had scattered across Europe trying to gather information and recruit people who could fight back against the Germans. He'd met Virginia at the Spanish border during her escape from France. They'd talked. Bellows was trained to assess people, to spot potential, to recognize qualities that most people missed, and he saw something in Virginia. Intelligence, obviously. She was educated, spoke multiple languages, understood how to navigate complex social situations. But it was more than that. She had courage, real courage. Not the reckless kind that gets people killed, but the calculated kind that takes risks when the potential gain is worth it. She had determination, the kind that doesn't quit when things get hard. She had the ability to think on her feet, to adapt when plans fell apart, to improvise solutions to impossible problems. And she had a quality that's hard to define but essential for covert operations. She could blend in. Despite her limp, despite being an American in Europe, she could make herself unremarkable, forgettable, invisible. That's gold in the intelligence world. Before they parted ways at the border, Bellows gave Virginia a phone number in London. Just a number, no explanation. He told her to call it if she ever wanted to do something that mattered. Virginia kept that number, and when she got to London, after turning down the safe desk job, she called it. The man who answered was Nicholas Bodington, an officer with something called the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. Virginia had never heard of it. Most people hadn't. That was the point. The SOE was Churchill's secret army. When France fell and Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, Churchill knew conventional warfare alone wouldn't be enough. They needed something else, something unconventional, something the Nazis wouldn't expect. So he created the Special Operations Executive with one mission, as he put it: set Europe ablaze. The SOE's job was sabotage, subversion, resistance, guerrilla warfare. Everything the British military couldn't do officially, the SOE did in the shadows. They trained agents and dropped them into occupied territories. They supplied resistance groups with weapons and explosives. They organized acts of sabotage against German factories, railways, bridges, anything that would hurt the Nazi war effort. It was dangerous work. Agents caught by the Germans were tortured and executed. There were no uniforms, no Geneva Convention protections. If you were captured doing SOE work, you died badly. Nicholas Boddington met with Virginia in person. She walked into his office with her slight limp, well-dressed, composed, speaking perfect French and German. Boddington interviewed her, testing her language skills, her knowledge of France, her understanding of what was happening in Europe. But mostly he was assessing her character. Could she handle the stress? Could she think clearly under pressure? Could she kill if she had to? Most importantly, could she keep secrets? Intelligence work is built on secrecy. One person talking to the wrong person at the wrong time could get a dozen agents killed. Boddington needed to know if Virginia could keep her mouth shut, even under interrogation, even under torture. Within minutes, Boddington knew. Virginia was exactly what the SOE needed. She spoke French like a native, with the right accent, the right vocabulary, the right cultural references. She knew the country, had lived there, understood how French society worked. She was smart, educated, resourceful. She was absolutely fearless. She'd already proven that by driving ambulances through combat zones. And she had something else that was incredibly valuable. She was a woman. The Germans had a blind spot when it came to women. They didn't believe women could be dangerous. They were trained to look for male saboteurs, male spies, male resistance fighters. A woman, especially a well-dressed, educated woman who spoke perfect French, could move through occupied France with far less suspicion than any man. And Virginia's limp? Boddington saw that as an advantage, not a disability. It made her seem vulnerable, harmless. No one would suspect a limping woman of being a dangerous spy. They'd feel sorry for her, want to help her, certainly wouldn't see her as a threat. That made her perfect. Boddington immediately recommended Virginia for field service. He sent his recommendation up the chain of command at SOE. The head of F Section, which handled operations in France, approved it. Virginia Hall was officially recruited as a Special Operations Executive Agent. There was one problem. Virginia had a wooden leg. When some of the SOE trainers and administrators heard about her prosthetic, they objected. How could she run if she needed to escape? How could she jump from a moving vehicle or climb over walls or move silently through the woods? How could she parachute into France with a wooden leg? What if she broke her prosthetic? She'd be completely immobile, unable to function, a liability to any operation she was part of. The concerns were reasonable from a practical standpoint. SOE agents needed to be physically capable. The work was demanding, dangerous, required endurance and agility. But Boddington didn't care about the concerns. He'd seen something in Virginia, a quality that transcended physical ability. She had the mind of a spy, the soul of a fighter, the determination to succeed no matter what obstacles stood in her way. He recommended her anyway, wooden leg and all, and SOE Command approved it. Virginia Hall officially joined the Special Operations Executive in April 1941. She became one of the first female field agents the SOE ever deployed, and she did it with a prosthetic leg. Training began immediately. Virginia went through the same training as every other SOE agent. It was intense, comprehensive, designed to prepare agents for every scenario they might face in occupied territory. She learned weapons training, how to fire pistols, rifles, machine guns, how to aim, how to maintain the weapons, how to clear jams. She learned to shoot accurately even under stress, even when her hands were shaking, even when someone was shooting back. She learned hand-to-hand combat, how to kill a man silently with a knife or with her bare hands, where to strike to incapacitate, where to cut to kill quickly. She learned explosives, how to set charges to blow up bridges, railways, factories, how to calculate the amount of explosive needed, where to place charges for maximum effect, how to set timers and fuses. She learned wireless radio operation, how to send and receive coded messages, how to maintain radio equipment, how to set up transmitters and antennas quickly and quietly. The radio was the lifeline to London, the way agents received instructions and sent intelligence back home. She learned cryptography, how to encode and decode messages using various cipher systems, how to memorize codes, how to burn codebooks if capture was imminent. She learned survival skills, how to live off the land, how to navigate by stars, how to find safe water and edible plants. She learned resistance tactics, how to organize underground cells, how to maintain security, how to compartmentalize information so that if one agent was captured, they couldn't compromise the entire network. She learned surveillance and counter-surveillance, how to follow someone without being noticed, how to spot when you're being followed, how to shake a tail. She learned interrogation resistance, how to withstand questioning, how to lie convincingly, how to buy time if captured. Most importantly, she learned how to disappear, how to blend into a crowd, how to become unremarkable, forgettable, how to create and maintain a cover identity, how to think and act like someone else. She learned it all, every skill, every technique, every trick. And she did it with Cuthbert strapped to her leg. If the training instructors went easy on her because of her prosthetic, there's no record of it. Virginia didn't want special treatment anyway. She wanted to prove she could do everything any other agent could do. And she did. When training was complete, SOE issued Virginia Hall her cover identity. She would pose as a journalist for the New York Post, an American newspaper. It was a brilliant cover for several reasons. First, it gave her a legitimate reason to travel around occupied France, to ask questions, to meet people, to gather information. Journalists do those things. It wouldn't raise suspicion. Second, as an American, Virginia was technically a neutral. The United States hadn't entered the war yet in 1941. The Germans were less likely to arrest or interrogate an American journalist than they would a French or British citizen. Third, the articles she wrote would be real and actually published in the newspaper. But hidden in those articles, in the way she phrased things, in the details she included or omitted, would be coded messages for London. Information about German troop movements, locations of ammunition depots, names of collaborators, positions of anti-aircraft batteries. The Germans would read the articles and see nothing unusual, but British intelligence officers trained in cryptography would extract the hidden information and use it to plan operations. Now, before we go any further, I want to take a moment here. If you're enjoying this story, if you're finding it as incredible as I do, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button. I know everyone asks you to subscribe, but here's why it matters. Stories like Virginia's, real American heroes who did the impossible, these stories are disappearing. They're being forgotten. When you subscribe, when you hit that like button, you're telling YouTube, hey, these stories matter. Keep showing them to people. You're helping make sure that the courage and sacrifice of people like Virginia Hall don't just fade away into history. These are our stories, American stories, stories of grit and determination and refusing to give up even when every odd is stacked against you. So, if you believe these stories deserve to be told, if you want to hear more about the heroes who changed the world, subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it makes all the difference. All right, let's get back to Virginia. August 1941. Virginia Hall arrived in France via train from Spain. She traveled with her journalist credentials, her cover story practiced and perfected. If questioned, she was an American reporter sent to cover life in occupied Europe. She had letters of introduction, press credentials, everything she needed to make the cover convincing. Her first impressions of occupied France must have been jarring. Nazi flags hung from government buildings. German soldiers marched through the streets. French police worked alongside German security forces. Signs were written in German. French citizens had to carry identity papers and show them on demand. There were curfews, restrictions, constant surveillance. This was what tyranny looked like up close. But Virginia couldn't react, couldn't show her true feelings. She had to play her role, be the neutral American journalist observing events with professional detachment. She made her way to Lyon, a city in the southern zone of France that was technically unoccupied, but still under the shadow of Nazi power. Lyon was perfect for Virginia's mission for several reasons. First, it was the largest city in the Vichy zone, a center of commerce and culture where people from all over France passed through. Second, it was close to the demarcation line between the occupied and unoccupied zones, making it easier to move between zones when necessary. Third, and most importantly, Lyon was the heart of the French resistance. Underground networks operated there, planning sabotage, printing illegal newspapers, hiding refugees, organizing opposition to both the Germans and the Vichy collaborators. If Virginia was going to organize resistance operations, Lyon was the place to do it. Her cover story was simple and airtight. She was a reporter for the New York Post, writing human interest stories about how ordinary French people were coping with the occupation and the war. The articles she wrote were genuine and actually were published in America. She interviewed shopkeepers about food shortages, farmers about German requisitions of crops, teachers about how the education system had changed under occupation. She wrote about daily life, about how people adapted, about the small ways they maintained their dignity and hope. The articles were well written, compelling human interest pieces that American readers found fascinating. And hidden within those articles, invisible to casual readers but clear to trained cryptographers in London, were coded messages about German military positions, troop movements, supply depots, and collaborators. Virginia set up her base of operations in Lyon, a city in the unoccupied zone of southern France. Lyon was the heart of the French resistance. It was where the underground network operated, where people who refused to accept Nazi rule gathered and planned. Virginia's mission was to organize them, to turn angry, scattered groups into an effective fighting force. Her SOE code name was Diane. Her network was called Heckler. She went to work immediately. She found a small apartment, nothing fancy, just a place where she could work without attracting attention. Then she started building her network. She needed contacts, safe houses, people she could trust. She found them in the most unlikely places. One of her closest allies was Dr. Jean Rousset, a physician who used his medical practice as cover for resistance work. He helped treat wounded resistance fighters and provided medical supplies. Another was Germaine Guérin, the owner of one of Lyon's most famous brothels. Germaine's establishment was frequented by German officers. The women who worked there overheard conversations, pillow talk about troop movements, security measures, upcoming operations. Germaine passed every piece of information to Virginia. No one suspected the brothel. Why would they? Virginia also recruited couriers, usually women, who carried messages between resistance cells. She found radio operators who could communicate with London. She identified drop zones where British planes could parachute in weapons and supplies under cover of darkness. She did it all while maintaining her cover as a journalist. She'd interview locals about life under occupation, type up her stories, file them with the newspaper, all while running an entire spy network. The SOE sent her other agents to work with. Some of them were good, some of them were disasters. One agent, Jean-Georges Duboudin, was supposed to be her superior. Virginia took one look at him and knew he was a security risk. Too careless, too loud, too confident. When SOE headquarters told her to work under his command, Virginia sent them a message that became legendary. Lay off. That was it. 2 words. She wasn't taking orders from someone who would get them all killed. SOE backed down. They let Virginia operate independently. That independence saved her life. In November 1942, Virginia was invited to a meeting in Marseille. Various SOE agents and French resistance leaders would be there to coordinate operations. It sounded important, necessary, but something didn't feel right to Virginia. Too many people in one place. Too many big names all together. It violated every security protocol she believed in. She didn't go. Her instincts were right. The Gestapo raided the meeting. 12 SOE agents and French resistance organizers were captured in one sweep. Virginia was the only SOE agent left free in France, the only one with a radio, the only one who could communicate with London. The weight of the entire operation fell on her shoulders, and she carried it. Virginia didn't panic. She got to work. The captured agents were transferred to Mozac prison near Bergerac. Virginia made it her mission to get them out. She recruited Gaby Bloch, the wife of one of the prisoners, to smuggle messages and tools into the prison. They hid them inside tins of sardines. One of the imprisoned agents, Georges Béguet, used the smuggled materials to make a key to their cell door. Virginia organized safe houses for after the escape. She acquired vehicles, arranged helpers, even got 2 French police uniforms for the operation. On July 15, 1942, the prisoners escaped. 12 men slipped out of their cells, out of the prison, and disappeared into the French countryside. Virginia moved them through her network of safe houses. From there, they made their way back to England via Spain. Several of those men returned to France later in the war and played key roles in leading resistance groups and SOE operations. Virginia's work didn't stop with the prison break. She coordinated weapons drops across southern France. British planes would fly over at night, and resistance fighters, guided by Virginia's information, would retrieve the crates of guns, ammunition, explosives. She helped Allied airmen who'd been shot down over France escape to Spain and then back to England. Pilots who parachuted out of their burning planes were told, If you make it to Lyon, go to the U.S. consulate and ask for Olivier. Olivier was Virginia. She set up escape routes, provided false papers, arranged transportation. She saved dozens of pilots, men who went right back into their planes, and continued the fight against Germany. The American diplomat at the U.S. consulate in Lyon, a man who understood what Virginia was doing, allowed her to use the diplomatic pouch to send information to London. Technically illegal, but he didn't care. He knew what was at stake. Virginia's network grew. More safe houses, more weapons, more sabotage. She organized attacks on German warehouses, railway lines, bridges. The Nazis knew someone was coordinating the resistance in Lyon. They knew there was a mastermind behind the attacks. They just didn't know who. Until they did. The Gestapo started hearing reports. A woman, an American, with a limp. The French resistance fighters called her La Dame qui boite, the lady who limps. The Germans picked up the nickname, the Limping Lady. They put her face on wanted posters all over France. The Gestapo commander in Lyon reportedly said she was the most dangerous of all Allied agents. They ordered every agent in France to find her and bring her in, dead or alive. Virginia changed her appearance, different clothes, a different hairstyle. She wore dowdy dresses that made her look older, less noticeable. She adjusted her walk to minimize the limp as much as possible. She moved constantly, never sleeping in the same place twice. But the net was closing in. November 1942. Operation Torch. The Allies invaded North Africa. In response, Germany moved troops into what had been the unoccupied zone of France. Southern France was no longer safe. The Nazis flooded Lyon with Gestapo agents. 500 new agents focused on one goal: find the Limping Lady. Virginia's contacts in the French police warned her, "Get out, now." Virginia didn't argue. She'd stayed longer than any SOE agent in occupied territory, 15 months, an eternity in the world of espionage. Most agents lasted weeks before being captured or killed. She prepared to leave, but she had one problem. She couldn't tell anyone where she was going, not even her closest allies like Dr. Rousset or Germaine Guérin. If the Gestapo captured them and tortured them, they couldn't give up information they didn't have. She just disappeared. Virginia traveled by train to Perpignan, a town near the Spanish border. Then came the hard part. She had to cross the Pyrenees mountains into Spain. In winter, on foot. The mountains were covered in snow. The passes reached heights of over 7,000 feet. The cold was brutal. The terrain was treacherous. And Virginia had to do it all with a wooden leg. Before she left, she sent a message to SOE headquarters in, say, London. "I hope Cuthbert won't give me trouble." The radio operator in London didn't understand. They sent back a confused reply. "If Cuthbert troublesome, eliminate him." Virginia must have laughed when she read that. Eliminate him, if only it were that simple. She started the climb. The prosthetic leg dug into her stump with every step. The pain was excruciating. Blood soaked through the sock she used as padding. But she kept walking, up rocky slopes, through snow, in freezing temperatures. She walked up to 50 miles over 2 days. Later, she would describe the journey in her typically understated way. It was uncomfortable. That was the word she used. Uncomfortable. Her leg was a bloody mess. She was exhausted, half frozen, in constant agony. Uncomfortable. Virginia Hall made it across the border into Spain. She was arrested immediately for entering the country illegally. The Spanish authorities threw her in prison. But the U.S. Embassy intervened. They secured her release and got her back to London. Virginia arrived in London in January 1943. She'd survived 15 months in occupied France. She'd built and run one of the most successful resistance networks in the country. She'd rescued prisoners, armed fighters, and saved countless lives. The SOE wanted to send her back to France, but Maurice Buckmaster, the head of F Section, refused. He said Virginia was too well known. The Gestapo had her photograph. She'd be captured within days. Virginia didn't give up. If the British wouldn't send her back, she'd find someone who would. She joined the American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's version of the SOE, the precursor to the CIA. The OSS didn't care that the Gestapo knew her face. They'd find a way. March 21st, 1944. Virginia Hall returned to France. This time she arrived by boat, landing on a beach in Brittany. She didn't parachute in with Cuthbert tucked under her arm like some accounts claim. That's the Hollywood version. The truth was more practical. A boat, a dark beach, a woman with a wooden leg stepping back onto French soil. Her new code name was Diane. Her mission was to prepare for D-Day. The Allied invasion of France was coming. Virginia's job was to organize resistance fighters in central France, to arm them, to train them, to turn them into an effective fighting force that could support the invasion when it came. She changed her appearance completely. She dyed her hair gray. She wore thick peasant skirts and shuffled when she walked, playing up her limp to look like an elderly farm woman. She carried milk pails. She tended cows. No one looked twice at her. Who would suspect an old peasant woman of being an American spy? Virginia made contact with the French forces of the interior, the FFI, the armed wing of the French resistance. She organized them into 3 combat battalions. She coordinated weapons drops. British and American planes flew over at night, and her fighters retrieved crates of rifles, machine guns, explosives, ammunition. She taught them how to use the weapons, how to set up ambushes, how to sabotage German operations without getting caught. When D-Day came on June 6, 1944, Virginia's network went to work. They blew up bridges to slow German reinforcements heading to Normandy. They destroyed railway lines to cut off supply routes. They sabotaged telephone lines to disrupt German communications. They attacked ammunition depots. They ambushed German convoys. They killed German soldiers and made the Nazis' lives hell. Virginia coordinated it all from a farmhouse in the French countryside. She sent radio messages to London with intelligence on German troop strength and movements. She directed her fighters with precision. Attack here, sabotage there, withdraw before reinforcements arrive. The Germans never knew who was organizing the attacks. They never connected the resistance operations to the old peasant woman tending cows in the field. Virginia's 3 battalions caused hundreds of German casualties. They destroyed vital infrastructure. They tied down German troops that could have been fighting the Allies advancing from the beaches. After the liberation of France, the OSS selected Virginia for a dangerous mission in Austria. She was supposed to infiltrate and organize resistance networks there, but Germany surrendered before the mission could begin. The war was over. Virginia had survived. Now, I want to pause again because I know some of you are thinking, "This is unbelievable. This sounds like a movie." You're right, it does. But here's the thing, it's all true. This woman, this American from Baltimore with a wooden leg, did all of this. She outsmarted the Gestapo for years. She armed resistance fighters. She helped liberate France. And you probably never heard of her until today. That's why I need you to do something. If you're enjoying this video, if this story matters to you, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because Virginia Hall's story, and stories like hers, they're being buried under clickbait and nonsense. When you like and share, you're fighting back against that. You're saying, these stories matter. These heroes deserve to be remembered. And honestly, in a world where we've forgotten what real courage looks like, we need these stories more than ever. So do me a favor. Like the video, share it, and let's make sure Virginia Hall's name doesn't disappear into history. All right, let's talk about what happened after the war. September 1945. Virginia Hall stood in the office of Major General William Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS. Donovan held the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second-highest military decoration for valor. He was about to present it to Virginia. President Harry Truman had wanted to make the presentation himself in a public ceremony, but Virginia refused. She didn't want publicity. She didn't want attention. She wanted to remain anonymous, unknown, invisible, the same qualities that had kept her alive during the war. So Donovan presented the medal in his office. Just him, Virginia, and a handful of witnesses. The citation read, "Miss Hall displayed rare courage, perseverance, and ingenuity. Her efforts contributed materially to the successful operations of the resistance forces in support of the Allied expeditionary forces in the liberation of France." Virginia Hall was the only civilian woman in World War II to receive the Distinguished Service Cross. Britain had already awarded her the Member of the Order of the British Empire in 1943. France would later award her the Croix de Guerre. 3 countries, 3 medals, 1 woman. After the war, Virginia didn't rest. She was 40 years old and had no intention of retiring. She wanted to stay in intelligence work. The OSS was disbanded in 1945, but Virginia found other work. She was sent to Venice, Italy, where she collected political and economic intelligence, focusing on the growing communist movement in Europe. The Cold War was beginning, and Virginia was on the front lines again. In 1951, she officially joined the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. She worked in covert operations, supporting resistance groups in Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain. For the next 15 years, Virginia Hall continued to serve her country in the shadows, doing work that will probably never be fully declassified. In 1957, Virginia married Paul Guyot, a Frenchman who had also worked for the OSS during the war. They'd met during her operations in France. He understood her. He knew what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed, what she carried. In 1966, Virginia Hall Guyot retired from the CIA. She was 60 years old, mandatory retirement age. She moved to a farm in Maryland with Paul and lived quietly. She grew old. She tended her garden. She raised barnyard animals. She didn't give interviews. She didn't write a memoir. She didn't seek recognition. The few times anyone asked her about the war, about what she'd done, Virginia would smile and change the subject. She never wanted to be famous. She just wanted to fight. And when the fight was over, she wanted to live in peace. But here's the thing that really gets me. Virginia Hall should have been celebrated, should have been honored, should have been held up as an American hero. But for decades, she wasn't. Why? 2 reasons. First, she was a woman. The men who did similar work got promoted, got recognition, got their stories told. Virginia got forgotten. Second, she worked in intelligence. Her work was classified. She couldn't talk about it. The government couldn't acknowledge it, so her story stayed buried in classified files for decades. It wasn't until the late 1980s, years after her death, that documents were declassified and historians started piecing together what Virginia Hall had actually accomplished. Even then, it took years for her story to reach the public. In 1988, 6 years after her death, Virginia was inducted into the Military Intelligence Hall of Fame. In 1994, the U.S. Army Intelligence Center named a dining facility after her at Fort Huachuca. In 2006, the British government finally presented her niece, Lorna Catling, with the Member of the Order of the British Empire that King George II had signed in 1943. Virginia had refused to accept it during the war because it might have blown her cover. In 2016, a CIA training facility was named in her honor. In 2019, a bill was introduced in Congress to award a Congressional Gold Medal to OSS members. Virginia Hall was specifically mentioned in the bill. But here's what really matters. Virginia Hall died on July 14, 1982, Bastille Day, France's Independence Day. She was 76 years old. She died at her home in Maryland, surrounded by peace and quiet and the life she'd built with Paul. She never sought glory, never wanted parades or monuments. She just wanted to do her part. And, brother, did she ever do her part? You know what I think about when I think about Virginia Hall? I think about that moment in Turkey in 1933, when she was 27 years old, when the doctors told her they had to amputate her leg, when she realized her dream of being a diplomat was over. Most people would have given up right there, would have said, well, that's it. My life is over. I'll go home. I'll live quietly. I'll accept my limitations. Virginia looked at that wooden leg and said, this doesn't define me. She didn't just overcome her disability, she weaponized it. She turned it into an advantage. The Germans were looking for a dangerous spy. They weren't looking for a limping woman. They weren't looking for someone who looked weak, vulnerable, damaged. Virginia used their prejudice against them. She used their assumptions to slip right past them again and again. She walked into German checkpoints with that limp, looking harmless, and they waved her through. Meanwhile, she was carrying coded messages, coordinating sabotage, running, an entire resistance network. That's not just courage, that's genius. Virginia Hall outsmarted the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in the world, using nothing but her wits, her determination, and a wooden leg named Cuthbert. And here's what really gets me. Virginia never complained. Not once in any account, any letter, any document did she ever say, this isn't fair, I lost my leg, I shouldn't have to do this. She just did the work. She climbed mountains with a wooden leg. She parachuted into enemy territory. She lived in constant danger for years. She did things that most people with two healthy legs would never have the courage to attempt. And when it was over, she didn't ask for recognition. She just went back to work. That's the difference between real heroes and the fake ones we celebrate today. Real heroes don't need applause. They don't need social media followers or book deals or movie contracts. They just do what needs to be done, because it needs to be done. Virginia Hall is the embodiment of everything we claim to value as Americans but seem to have forgotten. Grit, determination, sacrifice, service, humility. She had it all. And for most of her life, nobody knew her name. I want to tell you about one more thing. In 1943, the Gestapo put out a wanted poster for Virginia Hall. They distributed it all over France. It had her picture, a description, and a message. The woman who limps is one of the most dangerous Allied agents in France. We must find and destroy her. Think about that for a second. The Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, one of the most feared organizations in human history, said this one American woman was one of the most dangerous enemies they faced. Not the Allied armies, not the British bombers, not the Soviet forces. One woman with a wooden leg. That's how effective she was. That's how much damage she did to their operations. The Nazis hunted her relentlessly. They put hundreds of agents on her trail. They offered rewards. They interrogated everyone they thought might know her, and they never caught her. Not once. Virginia was always one step ahead. She changed her appearance. She moved constantly. She trusted her instincts. When something felt wrong, she didn't ignore it. She acted. That's how she survived when so many others didn't. But here's the thing that I think Virginia would want us to understand. She wasn't superhuman. She wasn't some kind of mythical figure with special powers. She was just a woman who decided that some things are worth fighting for. worth risking everything for, worth dying for if necessary. She saw evil, real evil, the kind that murdered millions of people just for being Jewish or different or resistant, and she decided she couldn't just watch. She had to fight, even if it cost her everything, even if nobody ever knew her name. That's the lesson of Virginia Hall's life. You don't need special abilities to make a difference. You don't need to be perfect or privileged, or even physically whole. You just need courage, the courage to act when others stand by, the courage to risk when others play it safe, the courage to serve when others serve only themselves. Now, before we wrap up, I want to ask you something. If you're still watching this video, if Virginia's story moved you, inspired you, made you think differently about what's possible, I need you to subscribe. I know I've asked before, but here's why it matters so much. We live in a world that celebrates the wrong things. We celebrate people who are famous for being famous. We celebrate people who whine about their problems instead of solving them. We celebrate victimhood instead of victory. Virginia Hall is the antidote to all of that. She had every reason to give up, to complain, to play the victim. She lost her leg. She was rejected from her dream career. She was hunted by Nazis. She lived in constant danger for years. And she never, not once, acted like a victim. She just kept fighting. That's the kind of story we need more of. That's the kind of hero we should be celebrating. So when you subscribe to this channel, you're not just clicking a button. You're saying, yes, these are the stories that matter. These are the heroes we should remember. This is what courage looks like. And every time you share this video, every time you tell someone about Virginia Hall, you're keeping her memory alive. You're making sure that her sacrifice, her courage, her service doesn't get lost in the noise. So hit that subscribe button, share this video, and let's make sure Virginia Hall gets the recognition she deserved but never asked for. All right, let's finish her story. Virginia Hall lived quietly in Maryland for 16 years after retiring from the CIA. She and Paul had a small farm. They raised cattle and chickens, they grew vegetables, they lived simply. Friends and neighbors knew her as a kind, private woman who liked animals and gardening. Most of them had no idea what she'd done during the war. She never talked about it. When journalists or historians tried to interview her, she politely declined. She never wrote a memoir, never gave speeches, never sought any kind of spotlight. There's a story, probably apocryphal but telling nonetheless, about a young CIA analyst who met Virginia at a retirement party in the 1960s. He didn't know who she was. He asked what she'd done during the war. Virginia smiled and said, "Oh, I did a bit of this and that in France, a bit of this and that." That's how she described organizing resistance networks, rescuing prisoners, arming fighters, and becoming one of the most wanted people in Nazi-occupied Europe. A bit of this and that. That humility, that refusal to glorify her own actions, that's the mark of a real hero. Virginia Hall Gouaillot died on July 14, 1982. She was buried next to Paul in Rockville, Maryland. The tombstone is simple. Her name, her dates, nothing about medals or missions or the war. Just like she would have wanted it. But here's what I hope you take away from Virginia's story. She proved something that we need to remember today. Your limitations don't define you. Your circumstances don't define you. What defines you is what you do when faced with a choice. Do you give up or do you fight? Do you accept injustice or do you resist? Do you serve yourself or do you serve something greater? Virginia lost her leg at 27. That could have been the end of her story. Instead, it was just the beginning. She could have gone home to Baltimore, lived a comfortable life, and nobody would have blamed her. Instead, she went to war. She fought the most evil regime in modern history with nothing but her courage, and her wits and a wooden leg named Cuthbert. And she won. The Gestapo never caught her. The Nazis never broke her. She survived the war and helped liberate France and saved countless lives. Then she went back to work for another 20 years, serving her country in the shadows, asking for nothing in return. That's an American hero, not the Hollywood version, not the flashy, glory-seeking look-at-me version, the real version, the version that does the work because the work needs doing, the version that sacrifices without complaining, the version that serves without seeking recognition. Virginia Hall was 76 when she died. She lived long enough to see some of her story declassified, long enough to see a few historians start to recognize what she'd accomplished. But she never lived to see the full recognition she deserved. That recognition is finally coming, decades too late. Books have been written about her. Movies are in development. Her name is finally being spoken with the reverence it deserves. But Virginia isn't here to see it. She died believing that her work, her sacrifice, would remain mostly unknown. And you know what? I don't think she minded, because Virginia Hall didn't do what she did for recognition. She did it because it was right. Because when she saw evil, she couldn't look away. Because when her country needed her, she answered the call. Even when that country had rejected her, even when they told her she wasn't good enough because of her disability, she still served. That's character. That's integrity. That's what we used to call American values. Look, I know a lot of you watching this are from that generation. You're 55, 60, 70 years old. You remember when America was different, when we celebrated people like Virginia Hall, even if we didn't know their names, when we understood that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for, when we knew the difference between real courage and the cheap imitation we see today. And I know it's frustrating to see how much has changed, to see how many people have forgotten what it means to serve, to sacrifice, to put something bigger than yourself first. But here's what Virginia's story teaches us. One person can make a difference. One person with courage, determination, and a refusal to give up can change the world. Virginia Hall was one woman with a wooden leg, and she helped defeat Nazi Germany. She didn't do it alone, obviously, but she did her part. She fought her fight. She served her country. And because of people like her, we won. That's the America we remember, the America that produced people like Virginia Hall, people who didn't make excuses, who didn't complain about their problems, who didn't wait for someone else to step up. They just did what needed to be done. And that America still exists. It's in every veteran who served their country. It's in every first responder who runs toward danger. It's in every teacher who shapes young minds. It's in every parent who sacrifices for their kids. It's in every person who does the right thing when nobody's watching. Virginia Hall's story reminds us what we're capable of, what we can accomplish when we refuse to give up, when we refuse to let our circumstances define us, when we decide that we're going to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. So if you're watching this and you're feeling discouraged about the world, about the country, about where we're headed, remember Virginia Hall. Remember that one person with courage can change everything. Remember that limitations are only limitations if you accept them. Remember that real heroism doesn't need applause or recognition or fame. It just needs someone willing to do the work. Virginia Hall did the work. She fought the good fight. She served with honor. And when it was over, she lived with dignity and humility. She's the kind of American we should all aspire to be. So here's my final ask. If this story meant something to you, if Virginia Hall's courage and sacrifice moved you, inspired you, reminded you of what really matters, then subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button. Share this video with your friends, your family, your kids, your grandkids. Tell them about Virginia Hall. Tell them about the woman who lost her leg but never lost her courage. Tell them about the spy who outsmarted the Gestapo. Tell them about the American hero who asked for nothing and gave everything. Because these are the stories we need to remember. These are the heroes who deserve to be celebrated, and it's up to us to make sure they're not forgotten. Virginia Hall spent her life in the shadows, serving silently, fighting quietly, sacrificing without recognition. The least we can do is make sure people know her name. Make sure they know what she did. Make sure they understand what real courage looks like. So subscribe, share, and let's honor Virginia Hall the way she should have been honored when she was alive. Let's make sure that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people still know the name Virginia Hall. The woman with the wooden leg who became the Gestapo's worst nightmare, the American who helped liberate France, the hero who never asked to be called a hero. If you liked this video, if Virginia's story touched you, there's more where this came from. More stories of incredible courage, more forgotten heroes, more reminders of what we're capable of when we refuse to give up. So stick around, subscribe, and let's keep these stories alive together. Because in the end, that's what history is. It's not just facts and dates and names, it's stories. Stories about people who faced impossible odds and found a way to win. Stories about courage and sacrifice and service. Stories about people like Virginia Hall. And as long as we keep telling these stories, as long as we keep remembering these heroes, their legacy lives on. They won. We're here, living in freedom, because of people like Virginia Hall who fought for it. The least we can do is remember them. The least we can do is tell their stories. The least we can do is honor their sacrifice. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these stories. Thank you for helping keep Virginia Hall's memory alive. And remember, if you see injustice, you don't look away. You act. That's what Virginia's mother taught her. That's what Virginia lived. And that's the lesson she left for all of us. Now go out there and do something that matters, just like Virginia Hall did.